All right, I think we can probably go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Today we have a Flutter workshop for you, given by Shristi Chitlangia, who will introduce herself. She's one of our organizers on the Freetail team. As always, this video will be uploaded to YouTube shortly after the workshop, in case you want to go back and rewatch it. If you have any live questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I will happily ask them to Shristi on your behalf. And with that out of the way, Shristi, take it away.
Hi, so I'm Shristi and I'm an organizer for Freetail Hackers. I'm a rising sophomore and I'm a computer science major at the University of Texas. So I'm currently doing an internship for Shristi Technologies on a full stack development using Flutter as well. And so today's workshop is going to be on Flutter. And so without further ado, let's start. So Flutter is basically an open source UI kit developed by Google. For those of you familiar with React Native, it's kind of the same thing, except React Native is made by Facebook and this is made by Google. The biggest difference is also that in React Native, when you want to develop cross-platform apps, you have to either develop it as a developer, as a base template, or as a native app. But Flutter lets you develop it as a native app by itself, which means that it comes with more packages and more options, including material design, icons, and colors and widgets that already come in place. So Flutter can be used for websites, web applications, desktop applications, and mobile applications. So currently I'm working on building an Android and iOS app, and which is what we'll make today. The language that is used on Flutter is Dart, which is a combination of all these languages, which makes it pretty dynamic and structured in the same way. And so if you're more familiar with Java, you can make the code be more syntactically structured like Java, or if you're more familiar with JavaScript, it can be just as dynamic. So there's that flexibility. If you are watching this and you do not have Flutter installed after this video or during it right now, you can go ahead and go on this link and get the Flutter installation, which will walk you through the IDE you can use. So they prefer to use either VS Code or directly on Android Studio. You would need both. You would need a text editor and Android Studio just because the Android Studio is handling the Android part and the mechanism behind it. Plus you need the AVD manager in order to create a simulated device. I personally use VS Code and then just have Android Studio downloaded on the side. But that's my preference. So the next thing is that Flutter Dev is what the platform is. So for React Native users, just like React Native is a platform and JavaScript is the language, both of them have their own development code and source code. So this is here. We also, for today's code, I made a GitHub repository with all our code that we're going to be creating. So if you want to follow along and not type the code right now, the link will be sent out on the YouTube live stream by Unch. And yeah, what our goal today is that we're going to be making a 2-screen app. These are screenshots, but I can give you a live demo of the actual app right now. And that's basically that it will be, for example, having a picture on the left, a title, subtitle using a list tile view, and then an icon, which is clickable. And as soon as you click the icon, it leads you to this new page. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start on the code. So go ahead on your terminal. By now you should have had Flutter. You should have had Flutter installed and ready to go. So what we're going to do is I'm going to cd in to my repository. And then once I'm in there, I'm going to run Flutter create and then the name of your project. So we're going to call it our first app. And once we do that, you can see that in the terminal, it's going to be creating all the packages. So that takes a couple of seconds to make. And I can cross this out so I can show it to you guys later. So it takes a couple of seconds for it to install all the packages and then get the environment set up. While we're waiting, if there are any questions, I can answer that. Otherwise, we can just wait here. Hope everyone's doing okay. Oh, while we're doing that, let me just show you the live app as well. So usually it doesn't take this long for the command line terminal to make the app, but I guess today, because I'm running Zoom and everything, it's going slower. Mm. All right, I'm gonna pretend that this app has been created, and let me show you the code then, because the AVD manager doesn't seem to be working, but that's okay. Just a sec. Okay, so this is a sample of the app you would have. When you open up the package, what you're gonna get is you're gonna get this whole directory of things that you can have. Usually you're only gonna be working with the lib, which is basically where your code runs in. This Android and this iOS stuff is used for building the app on the cross-platform and running the Android and the iOS simulation. Granted, if you're on a Windows computer or on a Linux computer, you cannot make an Apple compatible app. However, the code structure is the same. So if anyone on a Mac runs your code, they should be able to run it as well, which is the beauty of this. And if you're on a Windows user, you can always VM into a Mac OS in order to make the Apple app as well. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to delete all of this code because you don't need it in the main Dart file. What I am going to do, the first thing is I'm going to import Flutter package materials. So if I do package : Flutter, and then I do material.dart, that gives me the Android library. And if I do import package Flutter, and then I do, let me type it in, package Flutter Cupertino, that gives me the iOS stuff. So the first thing you're gonna need in this is you're gonna need a main function, because if you're familiar with Java or anything, it needs a main starting point in order to launch the application, which is what you're gonna do right here. And so the first thing you do is you're gonna call the run app function, which is gonna take a my app parameter, and we'll fill all these. All of these are error source right now, but we'll fill it in. So this main function launches the app, and it's the starting point of the app. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a my app class. So that goes class my app extends stateless widget. And then I have to call the build function, because that is part of the stateless widget class that is required. So essentially, a really quick, stateless widgets are, so Flutter is composed of widgets and components. And so basically think of it as a stack that everything is kind of piled on top of each other. And that sequence of stacks and like all of the embedded technologies inside it is what you would need in order to create a full development app. The stateless widget itself means that every time you load the app again, it reloads the whole content inside of that stateless widget. There's something else called the stateful widget, which means that it doesn't reload the whole part. Instead, it only reloads part of that component. So if you write a code that is changing every time you load the app and you want it to change, that's going to go in the stateful widget instead of the stateless widget. So now that you have a stateless widget, what we're going to do is we're going to return not null, but we're going to return a material app widget, which is basically you only tend to use it once, and that's usually in the first launch of the app. So the material app is a widget that starts the application and kind of creates the basic commands. So first you're going to put in the title, and I'm going to call it my first Flutter app, which is the title of the overall project, not the title of your app necessarily. And then for home, I'm going to call a function called home page like this. And I'm going to pass in a title, which I'm going to call first app. So the way that this works is that right now it shows that homepage does not exist. We're going to create a class in order to define it. So that's going to happen right here. We're going to new file, and then I'm going to call it homepage.dart. I'm using camel casing because that's the convention, and just make sure that it ends on a Dart file so that it's compatible. And then I'm going to go ahead and import that homepage right here. So if I go into the directory, I see homepage.dart, and that's where it comes up. However, this is not defined, so we're going to add this. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to import the material Dart. So package, Flutter, and then Cupertino comes up, and then I'm also going to import the material because that's for Android. So once you have that, now I'm going to do is I'm going to create a class called homepage, which extends a stateful widget. And that's because we're going to be creating a list of pictures, and that's going to be changing. So you need it to be stateful. So this takes in a string to be the title. So we're going to also, every time you use a stateless widget, your variables inside the class are always going to be declared final for the class variables. But I'm going to be declaring this string a final variable too, because we don't want the title of the app changing for the app bar status. And because it's final, I have to declare it. So I call homepage, and then I pass it in this title, and therefore now title has been initiated. Also notice I have an underscore before title, which means that the underscore makes the variable private. So classes accessing this home page cannot access my variable. It's the same thing in Java calling something private. And so that's the syntax you use. You just use an underscore. And now I'm going to call a home page state widget in order to do all my code, because the stateful class doesn't really do it. It's the helper class that helps it instead. So because this is an override function, I'm going to write override, and then I'm going to call homepage state, create state, which is a function call. And then I'm going to pass in a single argument for the function. Every time there's only a single line of code for a function, you just use this equal arrow thing. And then I'm going to pass in our title. And that pretty much completes this part. There's a red line because we haven't created it. So now we're going to define the homepage state class. Notice it's also a private class, so only the initial declaration of a home page can initiate this homepage state class. And always, whatever you name this homepage or this to be the stateful widget, you always have to have the same name right here plus state at the end, as that's according to convention. And then you extend state, and it's going to be homepage, and that creates our class. And then we're going to call in final string title, and I'm going to pass in a constructor. So homepage state this underscore title, and that declares our title. Notice that it's still erroring because we don't have the implementation of the state build, which is also a required method. So notice it's the same from the main, because this extension essentially makes this a stateless widget. However, it's able to be mutated, so that makes the difference of making it a stateful object. Okay, so now we're gonna call the build function, which again, it overrides it. And instead of returning null, so on the main, we returned a material app object. Now we're gonna be returning a scaffold, which essentially takes care of the generic view of the app. So if you create a scaffold, and we're gonna pass in the first parameter is gonna be the app bar, and you're gonna call the app bar function, and we're gonna say, so the app bar is basically the title at the top of the screen. So if I say app bar, I'm gonna say center title, and I'm gonna put it true because in iPhones, your title comes to be center automatically, but in Android, it's usually on the left. And if we want it to be the same throughout, you would just make that to be true. So now background color, I can just call the colors. It's already imported, part of material.dart from the library we imported. And then if you call deep, let's say I want to make it purple. So I'm going to call deep purple, and that makes the background color. And now I'm going to add a title, and we're going to send in a text. So the first parameter that goes in a text is going to be the actual text itself. So because I want it to be the title, I'm going to call our title variable, and then I'm going to go ahead and give this some style, and it's going to be text style. And here you can really control anything about the style. You can add like borders, a background, or anything. I'm really just going to be giving it like a weight. So font weight, font weight dot bold. Also, there's shortcuts to writing everything. I'm just writing everything out for now so you guys can see it. But if you ever want to know the shortcuts, there's a ton of videos and source code online that gives you the shortcuts for both VS Code and for Flutter. And now on the scaffold, the other thing that's a required parameter is sending in a body. So right now, to show you what it looks like, I'm going to just say a text, and I'm going to say hello, and I'm going to put a comma at the end. So now if I run it without debugging, it's going to say, ask me which device I want to use. Well, let me just exit out of this. If I run without, it's going to give you a device. Usually it does pull that up. Let me close everything. You should be seeing a drop-down menu of a device to use. And if you click that, what happens is that on the debug console, you're gonna get a bunch of messages saying that, oh, we're activating the device, etc. And that should be able to run it. And then you'll see the app launch. And what should happen is that you'll get a screen with, so you'll get something like this, but without these three tiles, and you'll get something that says hello, but in super small font. Sorry that I can't pull it up right now. I'm not exactly sure what happened. But anyways, let's continue on. So now that you have a home page, you should be having a deep purple app bar, and then you should be having a title text. And then for the body, what we're going to do is we're going to create a list of icons and images in order to do that. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to go in Google, and I'm going to go ahead and go on Google Images. And then I am going to search up 3 things that I want a picture of. So let's say I want a sunset. I'm going to find a sunset. And then let's say I like this one. I'm going to save the image. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the directory of where my project is stored, and I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to create a new folder called assets, which is pretty conventional if you want to put any fonts, images, or anything extra you're putting in. It usually goes into assets. And then because I want to add a gallery of images, I'm going to create a new folder and call it images. And I'm going to go ahead and call it sunset.jpg and put it in images and save it. And then let's go ahead and pick 2 more images. So personally, I'm going to do like an ocean and then mountains because that's something I like. But you're more than welcome to choose anything you want. So we're going to do ocean.jpg, and then we're going to go ahead and do, oh, I also realized that when you're running your app, there should be an error about an SDK version. I'll go ahead and show you how to fix that right now after I finish this images. So mountains, I like these mountains, and then I'm going to go ahead and save it. Okay, so now I have all 3 saved. I'm going to minimize this. And if you look, I have it in my assets folder. For fixing the error on the SDK, you're going to go into your Android function or your folder directory, and you're going to click app, and then you're going to go in the build Gradle version. Most of you guys should already have this at 28, which is what's causing the problem. We need to change this to be 29. So it's on line 29, and then there's a target SDK version right here, line 43, which is also going to be 29. So once you fix that, and then you go back into main.dart and you click run without debugging, you should be able to see this drop-down menu, or if you already have it, you'll be able to see that. So now that I have that drop-down menu, you'll be able to see the Android emulator as well. Okay, now that we have our image assets, what we're going to do is we're going to go into pubspec YAML, which is where you install your dependencies and your packages. And because we're having images, what we're going to do is we're going to add it to our Flutter app, like this right here. Below this, I'm going to call assets, and then I'm going to say assets, images, and that basically tells Flutter that I have a folder called images in this directory. And so it goes to the assets folder, and it looks, and under images, there's 3 images. So that's basically telling Flutter what's happening there. Okay, so we're going to create a list of images, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to go to the top of our class right here, and after the constructor, we're going to declare, what code am I getting here? Let me just fix this. Oh, okay, so I understand why I'm getting the errors because I was working on something before, and I had to degrade the Flutter in order to fix a different error. But I know what's happening, so I know what should be happening. If you have any errors happening right now, just give me a message, or if you're watching the recorded message, go ahead and Slack me. I should be able to help you debug the starting errors because I had a lot of those when I was starting too. So we'll just ignore this for now, and then we wanted to create a list of images. And so the way that's going to work is that we're going to create a list of string first in order to store the image paths of each. And so I'm going to call it image path is equal to, and notice that this is a declaration, so I'm going to put a semicolon at the end, just like Java. And then I'm going to go ahead and add the objects in. So my first image is in assets, it's in images, and then it's called sunset.jpg. And then my next one is called assets, images, and then mountains.jpg. And my last one is going to be assets, images, ocean, image.jpg. So that's 3 of my pictures, and then I have 3 objects inside my list. And now we're gonna call each of these in order to make an image out of them. So I'm gonna go ahead and declare a variable called list image, and it's gonna be called images. Notice that they're all private because other classes don't necessarily need to use these. So I'm just creating the list here. And then we're gonna go ahead and write a method called void populate images. And because it's a void function, because it doesn't return anything, so there's no return type, but we'll go ahead and now add objects to the images. So the way that works is we're gonna call a for loop, and I can either declare this to be int I or var I. So just like JavaScript, Dart has the ability to use a dynamic definition of a variable. But once you declare it as like an integer or a string or something, then it just stays that. There's another thing called dynamic, which serves like a Python variable, and you can change its object type. So that's why Dart has the flexibility to code in a language that you already have familiarity with. And so it's not completely new. So we're gonna go ahead and iterate through the length of image paths, and then we're gonna increment through the loop. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna have an image. We're gonna declare an object called imagePic is equal to image. And because this is a declaration, I'm gonna put a semicolon at the end. And here we're gonna see that image, the parameter is gonna take in an asset image widget in order to get the specific image at that directory. So asset image is used for local images. You can do network image if you're using a URL. And there's different kinds on how to like retrieve an image depending on where you're getting from. There's a lot of source code out there. These are pretty much the basics, and I'm just giving an overview of running Flutter and using Dart. And so notice here I use image path at 0. And what is the error? It says undefined name image paths, which is right here. So why is it undefined? One second.
I think you forgot the S in paths, right?
Oh, right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's the image paths, and so it adds the string into the asset image, and it makes it into an image. And then now what we're gonna do is we're gonna add it to the actual list of images we created. So that's gonna be images dot add, and then it's gonna be just the pic. And that method is now done. However, because it's not called, you have another error. So now we're gonna go ahead and call it. So inside my build, I'm gonna call populate images, and that creates the images itself. If you want to see that all the images have been added, you can type in print images dot length, and every time that this widget is run again, you're gonna see it in this debug console right at the end, and it's gonna say the length. It's gonna be in either blue with the new update or just in normal gray, but you'll be able to see it. Okay, so now we have the populated images, and I'll just write it here. We added all the image widgets to the images list. Okay, so what we're missing now is we want to create a view on how these images are stored. And so if you remember, we wanted to create it like this, where there's an image on the left, and then the title, subtitle, and then an icon on the right, and then a second page route. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to come here, and it says hello right now, but we're going to change this to be list view builder, which is what is used in order to create and show lists in Flutter. And so the first parameter it takes in is an item count. And so this is going to be our images.length. You can see it's an error because I didn't capitalize the V. Oops. So list view. And then the next thing it's required is item builder, which is basically where you're going to be sending the articles to essentially. So I'm going to call this function build items for list view. It's not declared, but we're going to go ahead and write it right now. So this one returns a widget type. So we're going to send in a widget, and then we're going to call it build items for list view. And it's going to take in two parameters. It's going to take in a build context, and then it's going to take in an index. And if you notice here, we don't pass anything like as parentheses and then pass in like a context and then an index. And that's because in Flutter, when you want to pass a variable by reference or by pointers, if you're familiar with C, C++, you don't need to do the parentheses. You just call the name and it's passed by reference. So now here, I'm going to go and I'm going to return a design object that basically takes in an image from that list we originally created. Notice that design has not been implemented, so that's going to be the third page we create. So I'm going to go into lib, and I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it design.dart, which is basically telling us how you want our images to be displayed. And so again, we're going to go ahead and import Flutter material, and then we're going to go ahead and import Cupertino. Okay, so you have this, and then as usual, you have to create the design class. And so this is going to be a stateless widget because you're not really changing much. So notice I used a shortcut and it automatically brings up the stateless widget plus the build method. You could look up the shortcuts online for VS Code or anything like I said before. So I'm going to call this design. And then on home page, I'm going to come in and I'm going to import my design file. So that takes care of everything. We have an error here. Oh, it's because I haven't passed in the parameter. So notice here, it takes in an image object. So we're going to define final. Remember that in stateless widgets, every variable is declared final. And so we're going to have final image, and then we're going to declare the constructor, and it's going to be called design, and it's going to take in the image and store it. Okay, so now we have an error, and that's just that the image isn't used, but we have every other error that is gone. So the way that we're going to do this is once we go into the build view, you're returning a container, which containers are the most generic widgets in Flutter. And if you ever need to wrap something in order to have more features, like control its width, control its height, control its features on topability, you're always going to usually wrap it in a container class. And that's usually the most general generic way to do it. What we're going to do is we're going to create a card object as its child factor. And I'm going to put a comma here. So notice I'm putting commas at the end of each of the parameters, and that's because there can be more parameters that go in, but you have to separate it with commas. Yeah, and we're going to go ahead and define the width to be double.infinity so that the card extends across the width of your phone simulation, or like if you plug in an emulator. And that makes it uniform across different devices, so you're not necessarily hard coding it. Although understand that like this sample app is hard-coded. It's just showing you the general features on how to use Flutter and how to use Dart. Yeah, so now I'm going to set the elevation to 3, which lets the app have this like elevated nature and kind of like pop up. You can do a lot of things. You can add shadows, you can add rounded features, but these are just the basics. And so I'm going to go ahead and put the elevation at 3. And then what I'm going to do is, because it's a card object, I want to give it a rounded shape. So I'm going to do shape, and I'm going to do rounded rectangle border. And then here, I'm going to go ahead and for the parameter border radius, I'm going to do border radius dot circular 8. And that makes it rounded. So after shape, I'm going to go ahead and put in a margin, and it's going to be edge insets dot all, which makes it all around the card. You have different things like edge, insets. There are different options of like going on how to control it. So if you do edge insets dot, you can do from left, top, right, bottom, window padding, lerp, only, symmetrical. There's a lot of things. I'm just going to use all so that it is uniform. And I'm going to go ahead and put that at 5. Okay, so now we're going to create a list tile widget for the child. And a list tile honestly is, I find, the most convenient way to organize something inside of a card. So a list tile will basically let us have this structure without necessarily coding in the width and like the distance that needs to happen between each of these little things, because that's what happens in React Native half the time. But in Flutter, it already kind of takes care of it with list tile. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do leading, and I'm going to declare all my variables right now so that we can know what's happening. Basically, leading, what it does is it puts anything you put in leading, and leading takes in any widget. So it can be an image, it can be pictures, it can be anything. And it essentially puts it at the left, and then your title is going to be the first text after the leading, and the subtitle is going to be the text below that. And trailing is going to be whatever happens on the right side. So that's kind of the generic way of how a list tile object is structured. You're not required to fill in all the parameters, but this is the way that we're going to do it. And there's a subtitle feature in a list tile, but I'm not going to use it because I want to show something else that can be generically used in other Flutter applications. So I'm going to say here is a title and here is a subtitle. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and do trailing and call trailing icon, and then pass in the context. Notice that this context comes from this build view function right here. Okay, so that's pretty much all good. And then we're going to go ahead and define our first function, which is going to be the thumbnail style, and that's just for the image. So image design, and I'm going to call, because it's returning a widget, you're going to be calling widget. You can also generically do it so that, as you'll see soon, we're going to be returning a container object here. So you could change this to be container if you wanted. Widget just makes it more generic and dynamic so that if you want to ever change your code, you don't have to change the return types, and it just goes along. So notice how, because I'm returning a container, I'm going to put a semicolon, and then I'm going to call the width to be 100, for example, so all the images are consistently 100 pixels. And then for the child, I'll just call my widget object. So now with your app running, it says that some title and trailing icon is not defined. If you go ahead and comment both of these out, then you're going to see a card with 3 images on the side. And that's what should be happening every time your app runs. You could also be seeing multiple lists and multiple components of the same thing in cards, because every time it's running, it's recreating the list, and so it's just adding it there. And because it's a list view, you can scroll up and down through it too. So yeah, that's what's happening there. And then we're going to go ahead and define our subtitle. and then our trailing icon. So I'm going to say title and subtitle, and I'm going to call widget some title. Make sure that the method names are the same that you put initially. Otherwise, you'll get an error. Like before, I didn't put the S in Pats, and so it gave me an error. So everything is case sensitive. Yeah. Okay, so you have this, and what I'm going to return now is I'm going to return a column widget, because you can do this with rows as well. So columns and rows essentially hold it that everything inside of a column widget is going to be column aligned and vertically aligned, and anything inside a row is going to be horizontally aligned. And you can have things like cross alignment axis, which make it like control how the placement is essentially. So I'm personally not going to use this, but a main axis element is a pretty common one. And if you want everything to be like spaced around or spaced evenly, you can just say space between, and it basically pushes everything to corners of each other. So that's something there. And then a column, instead of a child, it takes children. So in the children, we're going to first pass in our title, and we're going to pass in a text widget, and then we're going to say title. And there's something called style, which lets you control the text style. I'm going to call this text style. Usually for any parameter, if it's a Flutter class, usually every parameter has a widget that is called by the same name. And so that helps it because style goes with text style, and then you have alignment that goes with alignment. So that's usually a really good way to remember which methods you would maybe want to call if you don't want to have to keep looking at the source code. So I'm going to go ahead and make the font bold, and then I'm going to go ahead and color it. And so if you notice, if I do blue, it gives me this range right here. And I want this like dark 800 blue. So I'm going to go ahead and just call 800. And that creates a text icon. So you should be able to see this is a title on your card now. And if you have any questions, just let me know. I'll go back and I'll show you what's happening. So now I'm going to go ahead and put the subtitle here. You can obviously go ahead and style it. The only thing I'm going to do for here is actually I'll show you what I was going to do. Text style, and then I'll do font size, and I'll put it at 16 so it's smaller. Font style, if you see, I can do font style, and I'll do it italic, and then color, I can do it colors dot purple. Okay. Yeah, so now some title has been defined, and then the last method you have left is the trailing icon. So we're going to do widget trailing icon build context. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to return a container, and I'm going to, for my child class, I'm going to pass in an icon button, which makes it automatically so that you can navigate to other classes or other pages or other widgets. It's essentially for navigation. So for my icon, I'm going to do icon. I'm going to wrap it in an icon class, and I'm going to call icons.favorite. And this is the same that is used by Google Material Design. So it's pretty much standardized. And then after that, I'm going to go on pressed. And for now, I'm just going to pass in null. So it says that some title is not defined. Yep, see, spelling mistake. And so it makes a difference. Okay, so now if you have your app running using your hot restart, hot update, it should show that you have all of these. And if you try to click the heart icon, it's not going to let you do anything, and you're not going to see anything because you have it null. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to route to a new page. And And I'm going to go ahead and create a new file, and I'm going to call it new page.dart. And here, as you can guessed, it's going to be importing the same material, Cupertino. So I'm just going to copy paste it this time instead of typing it out there. And then now I'm going to create a new class new page extends stateless widget. I don't want to type everything out, so I'll just use the shortcut. Okay. It already has the build function. So this, when you create a new page, you're going to have it very similar to your original page. So here, as you can see, we returned a scaffold, which is what you're going to be doing here as well. So you're just going to return a scaffold object. And that's kind of the standard for having a new page each time. You can find different ones as well. Scaffold is the one that just does everything for you initially. So you just have to focus on doing everything else. And so I'll just have the app bar. And I'll pass in a title. And my text will be a new page. Oh, my charge is running out. 1 second. Okay. So I have my title and then a new page, and then all I have left is to put in a body. So I'll push in a container just because I might want to give it style later, and then I'm going to pass in a text object or widget. Sorry, I keep saying object, but it's really widgets. And I'll just say thanks. There's something else I can do. If you see, it's going to be at the left corner. So this container is marked like this, but you want it to be a comma because you're only returning a scaffold object and the container is inside of it. Okay, so thanks. And then I can do text align, and I'll pull it to the center. And I'm not really going to care about the font so much. So that's pretty much done. And then we go back to the design Dart. We're going to import our new page class. And then on our on press functionality, which is right here, we're going to change it to be like this. So it's going to be parentheses. Oops. So it's going to be parentheses because it takes in no arguments. And then what you're going to do is this function is going to be a navigator dot push context material page route. And then I'm going to pass a new parentheses. Every time I click enter, it keeps typing in things for me because in VS Code initially, when you do enter, it kind of just gives you what the required options are, but I don't need that right now. I mean, I will put it in, but I wanted to show it to you guys. So yeah, build context, and then I'm going to go ahead and return a new page. Notice I put a semicolon here because it's a function. So this in itself is a whole declaration. And with that, the app is essentially done. So now what you should see is, you should see these two pages. You have the images, you have the title, the subtitle, you have the icon, and then on a new page, it should say a new page and it should be centered. And then you should be able to see this back arrow, which happens by itself in Flutter, and just the word hello or thanks or whatever you put in there. So that's pretty much the basics of Flutter. Feel free to shoot me a message or connect with me or anything if you ever have any questions or just if you want to talk. But yeah, that's all I have for today.
All right. Thank you very much, Shristi. If anyone has questions, we will wait like a minute or two for the live chat. And if not, then we will call it a night.
Sounds good.
In case you forgot, this entire video will be posted to YouTube and presumably a link to the GitHub repository, as well as any other helpful resources that you might need while you are developing. All right, here we go. We've got a live question. We've got two. Okay, so first, if you wanted to link multiple apps together, would you have to do that code yourself, or does Flutter have something for that?
There are APIs that you can use. So if you go to the Flutter Dev website, Flutter Dev, then there's going to be an option to have the packages.
You can share your screen again if it's helpful.
Oh, you can. Sorry, I thought it was. Okay. So if you go to the Flutter page, under docs, or actually let me look it up. There's a faster way. Flutter packages. If I do that, then I can see the different packages that have different functionalities. So basically you would download them in the pubspec YAML and make sure to call that get function. And then if you want to integrate with other apps, you just kind of download the APIs and you can do it all through Flutter. It's pretty flexible in that sense.
Cool. And then the second question we have is, how much flexibility is there in terms of styling components? Are you stuck with material design, or can you make it look different?
You can make your own, and you can make customs as well. You just, essentially what you would do is you would declare a class, and you would just import that class, and then you would go ahead and do that styling. So if you look, if for example, I have this file and I don't like the way that list tile is set up, I can go ahead and go into the list tile original source code, and I can see what the original source code looks like, and I can modify it by copying it into a different class and then just calling that class, kind of like importing it how we did in the others, and using it accordingly.
It's pretty neat. Is there a way to use like custom CSS with that?
Yeah, there's pretty much, you can like customize everything. It primarily uses Dart, but Dart is a combination of pretty much like every language that's used for web and app development. So thank Google for that. So you can pretty much do anything with Flutter. The source code is a little new, so you would have to do a little bit more digging, but it is possible.
Gotcha. Very cool. Very cool. Okay, I think that is probably all for the live questions we have today. As usual, if you have any other questions, or if you're watching this later, please feel free to Slack Shristi directly. She is available in the Summer Hack Slack as an organizer, but she'll happily answer your questions. Thank you all for coming. Have a great night.
Thanks, guys.